Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain and welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about education because it's one of these things that most people, granted not absolutely everybody in the world, but most people to one extent or another go through a form of education. I'm specifically going to be focusing on the education within the UK and that I've been through and that I've experienced kind of vicariously through other people. And as a result, it's also one of these things because so many people have gone through it that everyone has an opinion on. Everyone says that they've had good teachers, bad teachers, that this was worth learning, that wasn't worth learning. And as a result, that's a thing that you can engage anyone on, and everyone has an opinion, everyone has a thing that they want to say, everyone has a complaint, everyone has a positive experience of some sort that they can remember. You know, there's always that one good teacher, that one bad teacher at the very least. And so, especially with some of the things that have been talked about over the last few months in regards to grammar schools and in regards to whatever else, I just wanted to have a look at education because obviously I talk about learning an awful lot. I talk about being very open but not too open to information so that you can take it on, you can look at it, you can break it down, and you can work around it. You know, because the information, the education provided in a best case scenario, a very secular way, it's completely transcendent. It's completely open to everybody to use, regardless of what gender you are, what race, what political affiliation. Doesn't matter. You've got a right to be educated, not a right to be ignorant. You may as well use it, right? But as a result, I wanted to go in and actually talk about education itself and the way that the system runs, because this is where I have a few hang-ups. Yeah, because a lot of education, especially within the UK, still in terms of your general government-funded educational establishments run by local educational authorities and things like that, though a lot of those still run off, granted, a much amended and altered, but still very much core industrial model of education. And I'm sure many of you have seen the TED Talks and the various other talks by, I think it's Ken Robinson, who is great. If you haven't heard of him, then I very much recommend his book, which the name of which escapes me at the moment. I'll have to try and remember what that is. If it comes back to me, I'll tell you. But otherwise, you know, have a look for him on YouTube. Have a look for him online. He has an awful lot of content out there to one extent or another, and he's great. But in regards to the industrial model of education, in a very simplified way, the industrial model of education was basically brought in at the dawn or during the Industrial Revolution because it was a way of ensuring that everyone that went into work at a factory or was going to work in industry, because you know that was the big thing that was developing at the time and it needed more workers, those people would have a basic understanding and as a result would have the skills and knowledge required to then be put to work within that industrial area. You know, it was very much a basic standard of education to push people through on. Obviously, that's developed over time and has become much more encompassing of more subjects than just like mathematics and language. But moving to the current time with that mindset of still very much, you need to come in, teach them what they need to know so that they can fulfill this role, they can finish this test and move on. With the focus around testing, it limits an awful lot because there are an awful lot of different styles in the way of people learning and the things that people do. I personally don't do particularly well at exams, simply put, because I went to see an educational psychologist at one point afterwards, after I had some issues with exams, and ultimately I've got a kind of verbal dependency. I need to be talking and hearing communication and keeping my brain alight as a result of doing that. I always have background noise on. You know, I might not when I'm recording, but that's probably because I've still got, you know, I'm still talking to you guys as much as it's still a thing I'm getting used to with just the camera. But as a result, after doing that, my brain starts to shut down a little bit, you know, and it goes to more pure problem solving, whereby if you give me an abstract problem, it goes, well, none of this actually really matters. It's not relevant. It doesn't make sense to a situation, in which case, you know, doesn't matter how many cakes Jimmy and whoever have. just shut that bit down. It doesn't matter. And so, I do much better on coursework where I can sit there and mull it over and go through stuff. But enough about me. Going back to the industrial model with it's falling short on these things. This is where it becomes even more worrying, where divisions in the potential levels of education are being brought up with things like grammar schools, and with the fact that there are still private schools, or when it comes to university, you have very much a pay-to-win model in a lot of instances, whereby it's the people who can afford it that can then go in, get the pieces of paper that may potentially, depending on what they've done, not really give them any useful skills or any useful information that they can take out into their new job or into the real world. And then as a result, they end up with a problem afterwards of going, well, everything I was taught didn't amount to anything. It's an unfortunate case of affairs, but the thing is, they've still then got that that piece of paper that says that they are better than other people, and it allows them to progress much faster and much further than other people, which again is unfortunate. And so what it comes down to is, in the way that I feel education should be handled, and I realise that at times it's quite difficult, especially when I was teaching. It can be quite difficult to do, because especially when you've got a large class and you're only one person, it can be hard to address the needs of every individual within that class. But you look at more at other systems, the Nordic model as one that is often kind of brought up and shown off as being particularly good, considering that I believe Finland is at the top of most educational league tables, at least first or second. And then you've also got the excessive uniformity and kind of rote learning of things like Korean schools and so on and so forth. So you've got various different forms of education that perform much better than, say, the industrial model focused system within the UK. Is it going to be hard to make amendments and make sure that all children can have a standard level of education to help them then move into the world, to help them gain higher education if they so wish, and to help them gain jobs? Yes, it's going to be an incredibly difficult thing to do. Where does it start, though? Well, it's going to have to start with the way that people are taught. Because at the moment, a lot of kids, even a lot of university students, are not taught the skills. They are taught purely the thing that they need to move through from point A to point B. Yeah? How many times have you been told things when you were sat in a classroom whereby it was, well, you've got all of these things in this textbook, but you don't need to worry about those. The only things that you need to remember for the exam are this, this, and this. Yeah? Even though the rest of the information could have potentially enriched your life, given you more background, got you to do further reading outside of that, and so on and so forth. Might have found something that really ticked with you and just made you suddenly really invested in what you were doing. Considering all of those things, and yet it's broken down and reduced into just this, and this for the exam, just to pass you, just to get you through, just to hit quota. That's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is there's not much in the way of kind of experiential learning, role play, storytelling, learning things that are actually practical and applicable to the world. This has come up God knows how many times over the last few years, but education-wise, why aren't we taught about the country that we live in? Why is it that the voting system, the way that the laws work, what rights you have, why are those omitted from the teaching? How is it that those are things that small children, secondary school children maybe, aren't being told when only a few short years down the line they're going to be entering into the adult world, horribly unprepared, and moving rather drastically from a situation whereby they always have a safety net, they always have people looking out for them, and so on and so forth, into a world where they are only responsible for themselves, where there may be people that help them along the way, but there are also going to be people that try and rip them down, try and ruin them, cause as much damage as possible to them for their own gain. You know, that's, I feel, what school needs to start becoming. That's what education needs to start becoming. Focusing on the work within informing children of how the world works and how you fit into it, again, in as secular way as possible, so that it doesn't matter which ideologies otherwise you attribute yourself to, it will work for everybody. And so, again, you know, moving on though into university, I worked at a university for a period, as I'm sure I've mentioned. Not so much again for the university, but I was there to observe. My girlfriend is still in university. I still managed to see some of the work and some of the things that she's coming across. And things like asking questions is a thing that I see that just isn't really doing so well. Yeah? Asking questions is core to gaining additional understanding. If you ask the questions, if you do the research, if you find the things, and then you filter the information, that's one of the big important parts. Using your reason and logic to filter that information down so that you can see where it comes from, what it is, how it all fits together. Those are the important things. Because if you don't do that, if you don't look at it at the quantitative over the qualitative and break things down that way, then you're going to have a bit of a problem. You're going to end up with contradictions. You're going to end up with issues in various forms when it comes to the wider world, because it doesn't add up as nicely as it would if you were just, you know, assuming that everything was bad or everything is good. And so as a result, with education, I feel like that is the role that needs to be brought into education that hasn't really been there in a huge form so far. You know, I had one teacher that was willing to talk to me about philosophy when I was in college, and what it comes down to is when I was having those discussions, it allowed me a greater insight and gave me more ideas for what I needed to go and find, for the questions I needed to ask and stuff like that. That was just the way that panned out. Now imagine if that was introduced to more kids, especially the kids that otherwise are disenfranchised and don't care. Yeah, that school to them is like a prison. Imagine if they were engaged just because of the stuff you were talking about, the real world stuff that they could apply, that they could see, that they could get their hands on. Yeah? It would be great to see that development and that understanding and that focus allow those people to then pick themselves up, move on, and actually be energized by that and see, you know, there's a lot of potential that goes to waste these days between being crushed, having creativity and things like that crushed by education, having kind of free thinking individuals or otherwise very directive and creative individuals all being crushed by forms of education. And what needs to be taught is the real world things. Sorry, the real world things, the focus on reality and realism, and having it just as a foundation for the things that you do. And then the last thing is, yeah, you need the information. You need that vast pool of information available to you. And there are some that say, oh, we'll let the kids dive into it and sift through it at their own rate. And there are various things that suggest that can be a successful model for education. But I also know full well that there are a lot of kids that would, you know, present them with a pool and they wouldn't dive in. They wouldn't go looking. They wouldn't, you know, there's no ambition, there's no curiosity. And that's fine. That will allow them to fit into a place in their later life if that's what they choose. but they still need to have that basic level of understanding. And so mandatory education that's streamlined down and presented in the context of the real world, I feel would be a great thing. I personally would have felt that that would have been a much more worthwhile use of my time as a kid, instead of some of the subjects that were being thrown around for seemingly no reason. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. What are your opinions on education? Because as said, everyone has one. I want to know yours. You know, what were your school experiences? Let me know down below. Otherwise, please drop me a like if you found my ramblings on this at all interesting. Maybe I'll do a more solid video on various forms of education, or maybe a whole series on the various forms of education and breaking them down as we go along. But otherwise, thank you very much, guys. Please subscribe for more, and I will see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.